Then the coal company came with the world's largest shovel, and they tortured the timber and they stripped all the land. Well, they dug for their coal till the land was forsaken, and they wrote it all down as the progress of man. And Daddy wants to take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay. I'm sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away. When I die, let my ashes float down the Green River. Let my soul roll on up to the Rochester Dam. And I'll be halfway to heaven, where paradise waiting, just 5 miles away from wherever I am. Then Daddy wants to take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay. I'm sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away.
Grab your hand and you say wait. I say no, girl, Hi, my name is Joshua Trevino. I'm the Chief of Intelligence and Research here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We're going to get underway here. Thanks for coming to the first, and I do mean first, because it implies a second and third and so on, U.S.-Mexico Policy Summit. This is obviously a project of the Carvalho Dialogue with our partners at Heritage and elsewhere. Very pleased to put it on. You're going to be hearing more from me later today. But for now, I would like to introduce our first keynote speaker, the man whose vision has taken the Texas Public Policy Foundation here to this point to where we've engaged very seriously in U.S.-Mexico policy. My friend and colleague, the CEO of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, Greg Sindelar. Greg?
All right, good morning. Welcome to Austin, Texas. I know there's probably no way you'd rather start your morning than with a long speech, so here we go. Now, I'll keep it brief and to the point because I think the point of the day is the conversations that we're going to have. But I think Josh gives me a little too much credit for the vision because it's something that he's been driving TPPF towards for many years, and we're thankful for the work because it's really important to what we're doing here in Texas. And I'd also like to jump on with Josh's comments and thank our partners in all this, the Heritage Foundation, our friends in Mexico, Patria Unida, the America First Policy Institute, the Center for Renewing America, and the Center for Free and Secure Society, each of whom has contributed invaluable work and insight to our efforts on this topic. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to our state-based colleagues, many of you who are watching live, but especially our friends from Florida's James Madison Institute who are here in person, who are tackling the challenges of the U.S.-Mexico relationship in their own states. You know, one of the things we emphasize here at TPPF is the reality that every state is a border state because the crisis of an unsecured border is felt everywhere, not just in Del Rio, Eagle Pass, but it emanates across this whole country. And if you don't believe me, you know, ask some of the mayors of these cities in New York City, Chicago, and elsewhere who are in a panic at experiencing less than 1% of the illegal immigration problem that we are experiencing here in Texas. And this is a national challenge, and in the absence of the federal government that does its job, the states not only must, they have to step up. And we're glad to see good Americans across the country and the other 49 states doing exactly that. And so at this summit, we have an extraordinary gathering of extraordinary people and a full day ahead with great speakers, great conversations, and great ideas. But don't forget that the very best conversations and the very best connections will be the ones that we will make with one another, off stage, and unplanned exchanges that so often lead to great things. When we first discussed this summit, we thought about doing it exclusively virtually. And don't get me wrong, that has its place. In fact, we have a robust live stream series here at TPPF, and we have a live stream later this week. But there is no substitute for fellowship that happens in person and face-to-face. So we're so glad that so many people are coming in to be with us in person. But that's especially true about doing this in person when the issue is as big as the U.S.-Mexico relationship. And make no mistake, it is big in every sense. With the world seemingly on fire, with wars in Europe and in the Middle East and potentially in Asia, and the United States deeply involved in all theaters, it's easy to miss that our greatest challenge is right here in the Western Hemisphere. It's right next door to us here in Texas. That challenge is deeper and more profound than any of the others because it spans every domain: history, trade, economics, culture, migration, crime, military, and beyond. In fact, no other challenge touches every single facet of American life as much as the challenge emanating from Mexico and our border. Of course, the opposite is also true. As our Mexican friends will tell us, no other country is as profoundly important to their own as their northern neighbor, the United States. To paraphrase Porfirio Diaz, the Mexicans are blessed, are cursed, depending on the era and context, by being so far from God and so close to the United States. And here in Texas, we have a special insight and experience with this fraught and enduring relationship between our two nations. We were born in a revolution against a Mexican dictatorship. But it is too often forgotten that our war for independence began as a fight for a specifically Mexican liberty. In fact, the famous Alamo flag is an apt illustration of that truth. The Mexican green, white, and red emblazoned with 1824 upon it. The heroes of the Alamo were Texan and Tejano alike, and the majority understood themselves to be within the American tradition of liberty. In fact, there's a reason that Travis's letter, which is emblazoned on our back wall here, but is an appeal to all Americans in the world. But they went to war to reclaim the freedoms promised under that 1824 Mexican Constitution. Indeed, one of the opening acts of the Texas Revolution was an appeal for aid to other liberty-minded Mexicans in the hopes that the fight for freedom would be truly national. 2 centuries later, here in Texas, we still stand at the crossroads where the ideals of the United States of America and the aspirations of Mexico intersect. That's why it is so appropriate that our summit on U.S.-Mexico policy happens here in Texas. The men of Spain began their high adventure on this continent 500 years ago, and the men of England their own 400 years past. And in Texas is where their inheritors met, made war, and ultimately made a nation. We meet today because that nation in Texas, and both our nations in the United States and Mexico, are under tremendous threat. The United States leadership class is gripped with an inability, or unwillingness, and most likely both, to face the appalling realities of the Western Hemisphere as they exist now. They do not grapple with the causes or nature of mass migration. They do not contend with the realities of left-wing autocracies dominating hemispheric government. They do not understand the nature of the cooperative synthesis of state and cartel that controls migration, trade, and security. And they don't even acknowledge the penetration of the hemisphere by the powers deeply hostile to America and our way of life in Russia, China, and Iran. Incapacitated by perennial absence of policy imagination, it does not use all the tools at its disposal to secure America's own liberty and safety, eschewing common sense solutions that we've talked a lot about at the foundation, things like direct linkage of trade and security, foreign terror designations for state-sponsored criminal cartels, and the use of the armed forces for their own primary mission, the direct defense of the United States. The threat to America is so profound and the American governmental response so weak that we must say directly what is obvious. The leadership class in Washington, D.C. cares more about the borders in Eastern Europe and the Middle East than it does about our own southern border. Fixing all of this requires, first and foremost, fixing the U.S.-Mexico relationship. The story with Mexico's own leadership class, if you want to call it that, is somewhat different. We cannot accuse them of looking away from painful realities, even with the serial fabulism and public denials of their president. AMLO occupies a hero's place in his own mind, and his narrative of himself as a singular and redemptive figure, even as his country falls apart, has done his nation great harm. Yet there is a cold realism underneath the bluster, and we should acknowledge it. The men in charge in Mexico understand a series of things that those in Washington, D.C. simply will not. They know that they may partner openly with criminal cartels who traffic in human carnage. They know that there is a metastasizing network and alliance of leftist autocracies throughout the hemisphere, of which they are a vital part. And they know there is substantive help on offer for themselves from Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran, for their enemies of and from their enemies of the United States outside the hemisphere. And they know that there's a class of desperate millions on the move every day whom they may weaponize and exploit for their own ends. And above all else, they know that the government of the United States is led by weak people who will not stand up to them. So given all the realities at hand, call the Mexican state and its partners in crime what you will, but do call them rational, because they are. They're making a high-stakes play, it's true, alienating your primary trading partner and allowing the use of your own territory as a base of operations against it is a bold move, to say the least, but we cannot accuse them of delusion. Americans suffer for it, but as much as we suffer, Mexicans suffer more. Therein is the tragedy of two peoples and two nations, each plunged into crisis. Ascending from it and restoring a relationship of friendship, peace, and goodwill is a task requiring both nations to do its part. It is also, I think, the most important task before us now. It's simple, but it's not easy. It requires choices. And those choices are what we are here to discuss today. So I've shared a grim diagnosis with you this morning, and unlike the governments in Washington, D.C. and Mexico City, we do not look away from that reality here in Texas. But I'll close with this. All of this is fixable if we have the vision and the willpower to do it. Here in Texas, as we start our fourth never-ending special session, our own state government is at work to chart a path forward. They're liaising with cooperative elements of the Mexican state where possible, rigorously enforcing rule of law and the integrity of the border where possible, and linking trade and security in ways that the federal government dares not. It's no wonder that Presidents Biden and AMLO both work together against Texas. They know we're charting out the best possible future, and their regimes are threatened existentially by our actions. Therefore, let me end as I began. Welcome to our first ever U.S.-Mexico Policy Summit. We've got a great day ahead. I can't wait to see some of the panels later today and hear from some of the speakers. And for my part, there's no place I'd rather be today than with all of you, and there's no people I'd rather spend it than with all of y'all. So thank you very much for being here, and God bless y'all. All right, turn it back over to Josh. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, man. All right, a few admin notes. First of all, the absolute most important thing, if you haven't gotten tacos out in the lobby, you must. They're very good. Our first panel is going to be on the Texas-Mexico relationship. It's going to be under the expert moderation of my colleague, Corinne Martinez. It does not start until 9:10, so we have a bit of a break. We're not go conference goers here. We want to make sure that there is the opportunity for the fellowship that Greg mentioned here. It's one of the principal reasons we chose to do this in person. So please, let's take a short break, get coffee, get tacos, meet one another. I'd be happy to meet with any of you, and I'll see you back here at 9:10 for panel 1 on the Texas-Mexico relationship. Thank you all so much.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first US-Mexico Policy Summit at TPPF, and welcome to our first panel for the day. My name is Corinne Martinez. I'm the campaign director for Secure and Sovereign Frontier, which is TPPF's initiative on border security, immigration, and US-Mexico relations. In this first panel, we are going to look at the Texas-Mexico relationship, the consequences on Texas of the state of affairs, the current state of affairs in Mexico, what Texas is doing and what Texas can do. We all know that there's a common culture and history between Mexico and Texas. And of course, that makes us especially concerned about what's going on in Mexico. Mexico is also Texas' first trade partner. In 2022, more than 500 billion of trade went across Texas-Mexico bridges, which represents 81% of trade from Mexico to the US. However, in the past few years, Texas has faced an unprecedented humanitarian and security crisis at the border with Mexico. The unhelpfulness of both the Mexican federal government and the American federal government has made it clear that Texas must step in. So today we have an incredible panel to discuss the subject, talk about the challenges and some of the responses Texas can take. First, Representative Ryan Guillen serves Texas House District 31. Representative Guillen is a sixth-generation South Texan and comes from a family of public school teachers who are veterans and cattle ranchers. At age 24, he became one of the youngest ever elected to the Texas legislature, and at age 29, he was appointed as vice chair of the House Committee on Appropriations. Since then, he has been a staunch advocate for creating jobs, cutting taxes and red tape, keeping our families and communities safe, protecting property rights, and securing our border. He has recently been appointed chair of the House Committee on Homeland Security and Public Safety, and as a member of the House Committee on State Affairs. He carried several pieces of legislation that will help protect our communities from the border crisis, including with Senator Flores, the Texas Racketeering Act, and legislation that increases penalties for the offenses of smuggling and operating a stash house. Having recently switched parties, Representative Guillen is the first Republican to win Duval and Starr counties in over 190 years, and the first to win Jim Hogg County in history, having won them in the 22 general election by an overwhelming 30 points. Chairman Guillen is known for his hard work and relentless efforts for South Texas families. Please help me welcome Chairman Guillen. Mike Bence is the special advisor on border matters to Governor Abbott. Mike has more than 30 years of experience in law enforcement, including more than 20 years in border security operations and administration at the US border, and he was an award-winning Border Patrol agent. In January 2023, he was appointed Texas Border Czar by Governor Abbott and has been overseeing border security for the great state of Texas ever since, helping protect our communities by filling the gaps the current administration in Washington has created and continues to create at our southern border. Please help me welcome Texas Border Czar Mike Bence. On my right, Glenn Hammer is the president and CEO of the Texas Association of Business. Glenn has a proven record in making meaningful and successful contributions for the business community in the public policy arena. He made it his mission to visit more local chambers of commerce than anyone else on the planet. He is also a part of the Texas Camino Real District Export Council, American Society of Mexico, and National Immigration Forum. He came to TAB after 14 years as CEO of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry, where he played a central role in major tax, education, legal, and healthcare victories. He was also at the forefront of the business community's advocacy for the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement and recognizing the global race for talent to keep our economy strong. Glenn is also a recognized champion in immigration reform. Please help me welcome Glenn Hammer. Finally, Jennifer Hyvee. She's the devoted wife of farmer Kevin J. Hyvee. They both own a pecan farm in El Paso County that is located less than a mile from the Trump border wall. They have grown pecan trees there for more than 20 years, and Jennifer was born and raised in El Paso and is the loving daughter of John Shuckett, and mother of 7 children, consists of 5 boys and 2 girls, all of whom she homeschools with great care and dedication. In her youth, Jennifer excelled as a scholarship collegiate volleyball athlete, showcasing her athletic prowess. Her faith as a devout Catholic is a cornerstone of her life, guiding her through her various roles and responsibilities with grace and devotion. Jennifer ran for the Texas State Board of Education District 1 and achieved 46% of the vote in the dominant Democrat area of Texas. Please welcome Jennifer. So let's get started. I wanted to start with kind of the history of the region. I've heard a lot of people who live who lived on the border telling me that it changed a lot in the past few decades, that it used to be that border communities were exchanging more, people were crossing back and forth, and the sister cities were much more of a cross-border community. Can you talk a little bit about how life and relations between Texan and Mexican communities were prior to, the past 2 decades? Maybe Jennifer, if you'd like to start.
Sure. In the beginning, well, I guess when I was young and it was still not legal to drink here, we would always cross. So as a high schooler, 16, 17 years old, it was perfectly normal to go to Mexico and have fun. And then as I got older in my married years, my entire wedding I planned in Mexico. Everything from my wedding dress, my bridesmaids' dresses, everything. It was just easy. You would cross back and forth and have dinner, have lunch. Usually when you went over, you would get your car washed and you'd have other things. And it was just like going over to grandma's house. It wasn't a big deal. It was wonderful and beautiful. And the people were, well, the people are still the same, but it was just a magical experience because we were like a sister city and things were very easy and understandable. It was a good, great relationship. Now, you can't go over. It's no possibility. Even trying to cross over for medical reasons, especially during COVID, that was a lot. What people did was go over to get medical treatment over there because it wasn't possible in El Paso. It's too dangerous. You can't risk it. You're basically going to take a chance of being killed or taken hostage or worse. So that doesn't exist anymore. As far as farming goes, we had plenty of employees. Everyone would come to work. It was a constant cycle of hiring, and of course, lots of people, it's hard work, so they couldn't handle it and they would leave. But now there's no one. I'm working on the farm. There's nothing else. There's no one that wants to work. Everyone that is crossing, they're not here to work. They're here for other reasons. I don't know what, but they're not here to work. Personally, I've had an illegal immigrant fall out of a tree one morning while I was outside. Didn't have my gun with me, so it was very scary. Had to just, stand there and tell him, don't come closer, stay away, stay away. And luckily, my foreman was able to come over and we called Border Patrol, but they're everywhere now, and it's not safe, and it's very scary.
Thank you. Representative Guillen.
Well, I'm from the Valley. I have lived in the Valley my entire life. I've probably lived within a mile of the Rio Grande River my entire life. Right now, I live about a half mile from the river, and my family goes back in our community many generations, 6 generations. In fact, my grandmother's great-grandfather there in our home community in Stark County ran for sheriff back in the 1880s and was elected as a Republican at the time. And so our family goes back many generations, right in the same place. In my short life, of course, our relationship with Mexico has changed tremendously, as was just mentioned. Growing up, we'd go very often. Typically on a Sunday, typical Sunday was we'd go over and have dinner, or go over and take out from our favorite taqueria on the Mexican side. But that, of course, changed around the mid to late 2000s. The last time I went to Mexico was in January of 2008, and that's when the violence started to escalate. I think it was before that in Nuevo Laredo. At the time, in the 2000s, I represented Laredo in the legislature. And I know about the mid-2000s, things escalated in Nuevo Laredo. And the last time I went to Nuevo Laredo was it was sometime in 2005. And I know that in Juarez, I think things escalated even before that, in the more early 2000s. But I think in our part of the world, things escalated at about 2007, 2008. And so since 2008, I have not crossed over. It's just too much of a risk to do that. But as was mentioned, before then, it was something that you did very, very often and very easily. And, to go eat, to go shop, to go see family, to go to do just any number of things. That, of course, has changed tremendously in my community since 2008. Mexico was a place that most folks loved. I mean, truly loved to go and enjoy their family and enjoy their time there. And it's just so sad to be where we're at today. The cartels and immigration has always been there. Has been there for a long time, but not to the degree that we see it today. Growing up, we had the occasional group of immigrants come through the ranch. I remember that going back, as long as I can remember. But certainly, what you see today, particularly and we saw it heavy in my neck of the woods. I don't know, about 10 years ago, up until about 5 years ago or so. But then what has happened here recently is the cartels are driving most of the immigrant crossings over a little farther north and or south. It seems like the area that we're in and the area that I represent is probably used more for drug trafficking, and the cartels have figured out that it's probably best that they move the human trafficking away from their drug trafficking areas to keep from having the Texas law enforcement bother them as much as we were bothering them over the last number of years as we've escalated our efforts on border security. And so as a result, a lot of the foot traffic has moved into all these other areas of Texas between Eagle Pass and El Paso and all that area. But we still have quite a bit down in the lower Rio Grande Valley as well. And so that's what's going on.
Thank you. Mike, can you talk a little bit about the evolution in terms of border security? Representative Guillen talked a little bit about that, but I'm sure you have a lot to tell us about that.
So
I want to comment on what both of these guys said. My first 3 years in the Border Patrol, I would get off of a swing shift, change into civilian clothes, and I would cross and go to Mexico. I would go to the bars for a drink, and I would walk past the very smugglers I saw earlier that day, and they would turn and walk the other way. They didn't want any trouble. It was not unheard of for Border Patrol agents to literally go back and see the people they had just deported and hang out on the south side, and it was a game. We're going to try to get through. If you catch us, we understand we got caught. We understand we have to go back. Over the last 20 years, what you've seen is the cartels absolutely control everything in Mexico. Cartels don't just control illegal trade. They've got their hands in a lot of legal trade as well, right? And so I spent some time in the military prior to going in here, and I've been in combat. And if anybody's been in combat, a 6-minute gun battle is a long time. 6 minutes is extremely long. I've sat on the river in Starr County and listened to gun battles that last longer than 30 minutes. Sustained 30-minute gun battles. Grenades are being tossed between cartels, right? We have an island that we just recently took over, and I know we'll get to talk about that later, where when we went on and took over the island, we had to sweep it first for IEDs. There were IEDs on this U.S. soil. And so the cartel controls everything. Probably in the last 3 years, they've really gotten into the immigration smuggling. If you've got to smuggle narcotics across the border, you've got to get it to its destination. And if you get caught with narcotics, your penalties are going to be pretty substantial. If you smuggle migrants and they're paying absurd amounts of money, you can literally stand on the South Riverbank and point and say, cross right there. Well, you're in Mexico, you're smuggling, but you're not really doing anything illegal because Mexico has allowed those people to be there. So there's great reward, very little risk. They don't have to cross in the United States because the federal government is completing that smuggling chain by simply taking the migrants, processing them, and then releasing them. And so there's a push-pull factor. You know, a lot of people say, well, what is Mexico doing about it? Mexico is a good partner when they have an interest and they're receiving, you know, their share of that interest. And the example I give you is every migrant that crosses into Mexico illegally, Mexico charges them $6 for a permit. So if we know that we've had at least 10 million come through in the last 3 years, do the math, how much money and how much revenue is that created for the government? Then they spend their money as they pass through Mexico. Mexico knows that these migrants aren't coming to Mexico to stay. So by the time they reach our southern border, their northern border, they've crossed and they become our problem. So it is financially beneficial to Mexico. Mexico has recently even told the federal government, you keep asking us to stop them at our southern border, but you refuse to stop them at your border. So you're asking us to do what you're not willing to do. And Mexico has kind of thrown their hands up and said, look, we'll do this much, but this is all we're going to do. There's been things put in place, and I don't want to get ahead of you guys, but we are part of the problem. This government is part of the problem because we are creating that pull factor and allowing them to come here. And by we, I refer to the U.S. government. And without that pull factor, right, we would see numbers like we've seen before. The Remain in Mexico policy, we can call it what we want to call it. It's safe third country. It existed forever. And it says that if you pass through a safe third country, you must claim asylum there. If you didn't, you're not eligible to claim asylum here. So they're gaming the asylum system. The administration is in on it. And a lot of people will tell you that the current administration's policies are, they're not working, they're failed. I guess that depends on what angle you look at it. I believe this is exactly the intent of this current administration. And so from Texas standpoint, we've had to start stepping up and doing a lot of things, and we're going to continue doing those. I apologize for my attire. I literally just drove up from Del Rio, where I was in court until 7 o'clock last night, fighting for Texas and our rights to continue securing our border, and we're going to continue doing that. Not complaining. I really wanted to be here, but I just wanted to apologize for my attire. I just jumped out of the vehicle. But it changed when the cartels really started achieving the power they have. And, you know, a lot of people, if you look at Afghanistan, the Taliban didn't start out as terrorists. They started out as opium smugglers, right? They were harvesting opium, and the purpose for it was they were drug smugglers, right, to create heroin. Ultimately, they infiltrated all the government. They came in control of Afghanistan, and then the Taliban kind of went from a smuggling organization of narcotics to getting involved in terrorism. And so we've got to do everything we can from our side to encourage and even pressure, whether it's financial or political pressure on Mexico, to prevent Mexico from becoming the next Afghanistan on our back door, right? If Mexico becomes a failed state, we think we got problems now. Imagine what happens if we get to that point where Mexico becomes a failed state. So.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate and everything you're doing. Glenn, before we go fully into the challenges, I want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about trade and how maybe it used to be, and it has changed the past decade or so.
Well, I want to first thank TPPF and Greg for the opportunity to be here and have this important discussion. And I've already learned a lot from the panelists. I just want Jennifer to know my family consumes a tremendous amount of Texas pecans. So appreciate what you do, and you made some really important points in terms of also the labor side. And Mr. Banks, thank you for what you're doing to keep Texas safe. And Chairman Guillen, you're a star in the legislature, so we appreciate you working hard and overtime and overtime and overtime for the people of Texas. There are obviously challenges. A number of those challenges have been articulated already today. There's also opportunities if we could meet those challenges. And the number one opportunity on the business side, as we look at it, is the ability to nearshore, to reshore to North America. I doubt there are many people here who would rather see things manufactured in China, which is controlled by the communist Chinese government, than in North America. And for North America to maximize its potential, we need a strong Canada, and we need a strong Mexico. We obviously, I'm making the assumption we're going to have a strong United States because of the power of Texas and states that have good policies. But we need all three countries working well together. I'm a big sports guy. It's hard to win a championship if you just have one star. You need at least one star and a couple of people on the team that are darn close to stars. And it's sort of my guide on what's the possibility, and I would recommend everyone read this book, The Globalization Myth by Shannon O'Neill. She talks about how if we get our trade policies right, the United States could be the economic juggernaut, continue to be the economic juggernaut of the entire world. It's interesting. There are incredible challenges, and I think any policy that we can have that reduces the power and influence of the drug cartels is a good one. I think any policies that we have on the state or federal level that reduces illegal migration, reduces the amount of fentanyl that's killing 70,000 Americans each year, that's a good one. And Mr. Banks mentioned the pull factors. Well, you take a look at what's going on in terms of federal policy. What's one of the biggest pull factors? It's how our asylum system is being gamed. It's the credible fear standard, and it's the ability to come into the United States and to remain, even if it's on a quote-unquote temporary basis. It's really not temporary. And the cartels certainly know that. The other area, and I'm going to get to is sort of, I wanted to put a thought out there right off the jump. The humanitarian parole standards have, I don't know what other word to use, have been abused by the administration. They should not, case by case is one thing. Entire classes of hundreds of thousands of people without congressional involvement is another. I'm a sports guy. I would trade tightening asylum and tightening parole for some sort of legalization. I didn't say citizenship, that could come later. For the DACA population, I would trade that for some better ag worker programs. So, I love being here at TPPF because there's a lot of, there's a lot of firepower when it comes to the power structure, and not just in the state, but nationally. And my final point is this. I really think Ambassador Lighthizer, when you take a look at what he did with the USMCA, he got it. He helped rebuild, with the Trump administration, the bipartisan coalition for trade. USMCA also includes migration provisions. It's called the NAFTA visas. There's 63 classifications of those. There are a lot of NAFTA visa people in Texas. Why don't you hear about it? Because it actually works. It's not abused. And the entire congressional delegation of Texas and in Arizona voted for that. And there's a lot of ideological diversity within that delegation. So I think we need to have that same level of seriousness, in my opinion, when it comes to some of the immigration issues, because it certainly is connected with trade, and it's got to be Texas leading the way.
Thank you. And yeah, we know that the cartels understand what's going on here, and they're fully taking advantage of that. So to go back to the challenges and the cartels, Mike, could you tell us a little bit? You mentioned Fronton Island, what you and Operation Lone Star did with that piece of land that was, in my understanding, is like kind of a shelter for cartels to operate?
So Fronton Island, and I know the representative is very familiar with it, but Fronton Island is about 170 acres. This area sits across from Miguel Alemán, and what you've got is you've got an area where the two cartels are fighting. You got CDG and CJN, and they're fighting over that area. So there's a fight there every night, right? I can show you drone video. You can go on TPS's or DPS's website, an 8-minute video of a 8-minute sustained gunfight with grenades being thrown. It's all in thermal, so you can actually see them pulling the pins, throwing the grenades. This is going on 60 yards away from us on the south side of the river. It was going on that island. And so what you would have was when Mexican authorities would come in to try to make arrests during these gunfights, these cartel members would move to the island. And then Border Patrol wouldn't go to the island, because if they did, they would run back south. And so they were using it as their launching point for, one, getting their drugs closer so that when BP wasn't when BP wasn't around, they could move the drugs further north. And they would also use it as their hideout to get away from the south side. So it was really a no man's land. It was a no-go zone. And so it was brought to our attention that it was a no-go zone, and we're not going to have a no-go zone in the state of Texas, especially a no-go zone that's been relinquished to the cartel. So first thing we did was we went into Fronton Island and we cleared it. We took in Texas Rangers, we took in SWAT with DPS, and we cleared the island. And once we cleared it, we maintained a visual of the island through different drone systems. And then we cleared this island. We flattened it. Every piece of brush is off that island. Now, just so you know, everything on there was considered an invasive species. But we got rid of all the salt cedar. We got rid of the Carrizo cane. And now we've wired that island up, and we've retaken control of that island. We keep LPOPs, which are listening post, operation post, on that island 24/7. We have had rounds come north. Fortunately for us, the rounds that have come north have been crossfire between shootouts with the Mexican federal officers and the cartel members. But this was an island where we had just, whether it be the feds or the state, had just succeeded that island and said, we're not going to go there, it's not safe. And so one of the first things we did when we came home was like, there's not going to be a no-go zone where cartels are just going to take over. So we went in, much like we did on the island in Eagle Pass. We took it back over, we cleared it, it's now safe. We talked to members of that community that said that they go out of their door, into their garage, into their car, and leave. They don't go out and sit in their yard. We're starting to see them actually sitting in their yards now. These are people that have been there for generations that were scared to even sit in the backyard and have a barbecue because of the fighting, knowing that they weren't being a target, but bullets, they don't, they go where they go, right? And so it's been a huge success for us. Is there still fighting on the south side? Not every night, but every other night. I'm not waving a victory flag on what's happening on the south side, but I think it's a victory for Texas that we've taken that back. We've made it safe. If now someone can actually go in their backyard, that's a huge win for us. And so we're going to continue doing that anywhere where the cartel thinks they're going to take a stronghold in Texas. That will be our number one focus, and we'll go there and regain control of that. We're just not going to succeed to the cartel.
Another instance where Texas stepped in where the federal government is failing and really playing the role of a shield for both Texas and America in the end.
And so correct. And so we you know, there are things, I want to be very clear, there are things at the tactical level in the field where Border Patrol and Texas, we work absolutely well together. We go out there, we do a lot together. One thing I will tell you about the Border Patrol is, you know, I bleed green. You know, you hear the blue line, that's the green line. I spent 23 years in the Border Patrol. My wife is still in the Border Patrol, proudly. She's in intelligence. Well, she used to be in intelligence. We got married and they told her she couldn't be in intelligence anymore. I think they figured she wasn't too intelligent if she married me, I guess. But no, you know, all kidding aside, I talk to the Border Patrol agents daily. And one thing they asked me more than anything, I had some text me, hey, saw you in court yesterday. How does it feel to have to go to work for the state in order to do what the Border Patrol is supposed to be doing? These agents want to be out there. They want to be fighting. They didn't sign up to deal with what they're dealing with. So if you can imagine going to the Austin Police Department, well, actually, you probably can't imagine that one. Somebody's a different location. If you can imagine going to a particular police department and handcuffing every officer to the bumper of his vehicle and saying, you will not go out and do your job, right? And then the administration acts surprised when the traffic's coming in. You know, and so I want to be careful in how I word this, but the Border Patrol they've had their hands tied in a lot of ways where they're not being allowed to enforce. We were just in court last night having to argue the right to keep people from entering the country illegally and having to fight against the federal government who's arguing, cut the wire and let them in. Explain that to me. I felt it was a very good day in court. So, and you know, I've been in court a lot in my life, and I'm not afraid of that fight. But there's not a day go by. I can tell you that I've had disagreements with upper management and Border Patrol on the river, and while it's happening, have agents walk by, give me a fist bump, and say, "Good," because we're not going to do that. To the point where management has to order other management to do things because the union and the Border Patrol agents won't support it because it goes against, you know, an oath they took. And so they're fighting a tough fight. They're in a very bad way. And so for my Border Patrol agents, if you see them, give them some kudos because they are being beat up. And please, you know, don't take out your anger on the federal government on them. Direct it toward the administration because that's where the problem is. They have laid out a welcome mat. They are teaching them how to game the system. And so, yes, but it's a no-go zone for the Border Patrol. There are areas we work together. There's areas where we can't work together because of policy. What we typically do is find the areas where we can work together. We double up. We get things done. Where we can't, we find ways to deal with that technically in the field and keep the politicians out of it.
Thank you. I'd like to go a little bit more in the details of what Texas is doing and can continue to do. You've mentioned what, of course, you have been doing with the example of Fronton Island. Representative Guillen, I'd love to hear about the pieces of legislation you carried during the 88th regular session and subsequent special sessions, what the legislature has done and what you think we can all continue to work on.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, we've carried a great number of different bills that have done a number of different things, but we got a few things passed that we're very proud of. We passed bills to increase penalties and go after smugglers and human traffickers and those who run stash houses and fentanyl dealers, and we also passed one to go after cartels, designating cartels as terrorist organizations. We passed a RICO statute, a state RICO statute, so that we can try to hit these smugglers and traffickers and cartels where it hurts financially. We've got a lot of other ideas that we've laid on the table that we're working on, and of course we've expanded tremendously how much we're spending. We've ensured that we've putting more boots on the ground constantly. We've made sure that our DPS, our military forces, have the resources to do some of the things that a lot of the things that they're doing, or all of the things that they're doing, including putting concertina wire along the banks, including putting buoys in the river, including putting storage containers in some of these areas, putting fencing, putting wall, and so I think from the perspective of the state of Texas and the Texas legislature, we're putting our money where our mouth is. We're trying to fill those gaps that the federal government has refused to fill, and I think we're doing a pretty good job of it. We're apprehending millions of people each year, or at least over 1 million people each year. Which in essence means that we're helping make sure that we know who's coming in, and every day we're trying to do better with that, to make sure that every person that comes in we know about, and that's our mission. We want to keep these folks from crossing between the ports of entry, where we don't have anybody checking who they are. We want to keep them from doing that, and we want to send them to the ports of entry so that they check in. That's our bottom line goal. That's our way of trying to secure the state and make sure that we enforce our public safety, and that we prioritize our public safety here in Texas. Plenty of work still to be done, obviously. This is a very, very challenging topic, and until the federal government gives us a hand, I'm not sure if we're ever going to get our arms around it, but it's certainly something that we are compelled to have to get into and to do our best to try to address on behalf of the people of Texas.
Thank you. So I want to go back to trade a little bit. At TPPF, we think that at this point, the Mexican federal government and the current president in place has shown no will to help us on the security side, and that at some point they have to feel that they have to do their part. We understand the importance of trade between Texas and the US and Mexico, but we think at some point we should link trade to security. So one small example of that was done in terms of what we call para-diplomacy, where when the Governor Abbott increased commercial inspection and then sign agreements with the border states saying that they would help us limit the number of drugs entering and illegal immigrants in exchange of what the governor would decrease those added commercial inspection. This is one way to cooperate, at least with the Mexican states. How do you see that situation where we involve trade to help us secure our border?
I believe the Governor Abbott working with the 4 border governors was very helpful on a few fronts, both on security and in terms of trade. Because we have to remember that just like the United States, we have a federal government and states, so does Mexico. Now, you could argue that the Mexican federal government is more powerful than the US federal government, but the states do have, in Mexico, do have a certain level of authority and power when it comes to both trade and security. And another point to make is a lot of times the governors of the Mexican states have a different philosophical bent than the federal government. I don't think many people would say, oh, Governor Abbott and President Biden, they're both American elected officials. They've got to be on the same page as everything on every issue. There is a similar dynamic, in my opinion, that exists in certain states in Mexico. You take a look at some of the agreements. You take a look at, for example, Nuevo Leon and what's going on in Monterrey. There's been a different level of challenge there than, say, in some of the other states. I look at the governor-elect in Coahuila, is known as Manolo. He loves going around saying that he's going to make Coahuila the Texas of Mexico. He cares about the security element. He understands the importance of it. I think that in one of the major elections, they had a candidate 3 or 4 years ago shot dead in broad daylight. They understand the importance of security, and they want to do more in trade. There's just as is in the case in the United States, there's a federal election coming up very soon in Mexico. So there will be a new leader. May very likely be the same party. We'll see. It's difficult to predict. I actually have a better track record of predicting elections in Mexico than the United States these days. But there may be an opportunity there. What we want to do is we want to make sure that policies are geared towards increasing lawful commerce and decreasing illegal migration and illegal goods like fentanyl and other drugs coming into the state. And the private sector in Mexico wants to help here. We have signed 7 MOUs with the leading Mexican business groups, including CCA, which is sort of like the U.S. Chamber, Business Roundtable, and NAM. They're the big umbrella group. They want to see lawful commerce. So what I would say is we need to work on the private sector side with law enforcement on the state level and on the federal level for what are those programs where we can help. Like, for example, the CPAT program, the FAST program. There's different things that exist on the federal side in the United States and even on Mexico that might be helpful, because I think we all share the same goals. We want to see legal commerce, and we want to see an end, or certainly a dramatic reduction in the drug trade and in illegal migration. One other quick point that I think is important here, in terms of the migration has changed. This is no longer single guys from Mexico coming in, which was the case for a number of years. This is a worldwide issue. I would ask, and this is a good one for TAB and TPPF to dig into. I'd ask, what is Nicaragua doing? What is Panama doing? What is Colombia doing? What is Venezuela doing? What's Cuba doing? What's Brazil doing? And why, you can't blame the government of Mexico for the fact now that thousands, I'm not saying that they couldn't do more to stop, but that thousands of Chinese migrants, Indian migrants, are making their way through the Darien Gap to come here. Why is that the case? So, I think we have to continue to put positive pressure on Mexico to do as much as possible on fentanyl in particular, and to slow the migration from their southern border to our northern border. And I think what Governor Abbott has done to sign 4 agreements with the 4 neighboring Mexican states we look at that as a positive.
I want to touch on that, but before I do, I did want to thank Chairman Guillen, because a lot of what they've been doing and a lot of what they've been legislating is giving us more power in the state of Texas to offer up more consequences. And we all know that you have a system of laws, has to have consequences with those laws. And so I just wanted to thank you for that, because you make my job easier. I don't know about easier, but more interesting. How about that? But thank you very much. And then I wanted to touch on the trade. Listen, we need trade with Mexico. It is a huge trade partner. We've got way too many companies down there that we can't be involved in trade. But as I said earlier, Mexico is not going to do something unless it's in the best interest of Mexico. And I'll give you a perfect example. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, Mexico's thinking about Mexico. The Bridge of the Americas in El Paso was shut down for about 3 weeks during the start of this major surge that happened in September. After 3 weeks of it being shut down, okay, now 3 weeks of it shut down, that's a commercial bridge, because every one of those customs officers were pulled out of that POE to go to the Border Patrol to process these massive amount of migrants because there was not enough Border Patrol agents to do it. That massively impacts Mexico and the United States in trade dollars. The way it came back open was the Border Patrol's response to Mexico was, we're not closing the bridge to punish you, we're closing the bridge because we have to have this manpower in order to handle these mass migrants. And so Mexico's next question was, what's the magic number? How many migrants a day crossing before, what's the magic number? Is it 1,500 a day? You can't handle 2,000. Can you handle 1,000? At what point can CBP send those officers back to that bridge to open it up, right? And they came to the agreement that it was 1,000. And so if we can handle 1,000 a day, we can get our bridges back open. So miraculously, 2,700 migrants crossing a day turned into 1,000 overnight. Of course, the state of Texas says, well, that's not good enough for us. We're not going to accept that. There is no magic number. The number is you should be doing everything in your power to prevent them from getting to the border and crossing, and we should be doing everything in our power. And so there were some still ongoing inspections. But to be very clear, inspections on commercial traffic by the state of Texas are to ensure the vehicles are safely operating on the roadways in Texas. So that is an example of the federal government working with them. But to set a number, a magic number, is unacceptable when your mission should be to deter anyone from coming to the country illegally. And then the last thing I want to point out before we move on is most people aren't aware of this, but if I cross the border and I come from a country that does not share my information with the United States, and I tell you my name is Mike Banks, I am now Mike Banks to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection for the rest of my life. I will be processed as Mike Banks. I will be released into the country because, well, you don't have a record of what I did in Nicaragua. If I'm arrested later in the United States for an offense, deported and returned to Nicaragua, I cross into the United States illegally again with now my birth certificate. That is now my alias for the rest of my life because the Border Patrol will only accept what was in the system. My point behind that is, with these releases, we don't know who the federal government is releasing because the federal government doesn't know who they're releasing. And so don't be surprised when you hear a news story that pops up and goes, hey, ISIS is involved in smuggling, and they have a smuggling network through Mexico, and they released 250 Uzbekis, and we have no idea where they're at or who they really are. And so border security is national security, right? And if you have to leverage trade in order to get that nation to do it, then so be it. You leverage anything you have to leverage to protect Texas and to protect the rest of the United States.
Thank you. We're getting closer to the end of our time, and I want to make sure that we're keeping some time for Q&A. So last question from me. I would like for you, Mike, to tell us a little bit more about Operation Lone Star and what Texas has been doing. You've been telling us a lot already, but one question that has been continually asked is whether Texas has the authority to do what it's doing. And I would love for the two of you to try and answer that question.
So absolutely, I believe we have the authority to do it because one thing I'm not going to do is violate the law. I will secure the border any way I can within the law. So we do. We're doing phenomenal. I can tell you that the last number I gave, over 480,000 referrals to U.S. Border Patrol. What that means is that's 480,000 people that got past the Border Patrol and would have been free to roam about the country. We would have added those to the 1.9 million known gotaways that even the former chief of the Border Patrol said conservatively he thinks you could add another 20% to that. I would say conservatively you could add more. And then if you're not familiar with what known gotaways are, those are people that have crossed the border that we know have crossed the border. We've either seen them, we've got them on video or camera, and they avoided detection or apprehension, and they've never been apprehended. We don't know where they're there. I ask you this question. If you can cross the border, turn yourself into Border Patrol, and be released within hours, Why would you not surrender? And you're not surrendering because you have something in your record, something in your background that prevents you from being amenable to release. Those are the targets that we want to apprehend. Those are the ones that we want. And so Operation Lone Star, it started to fill those gaps that was created by the administration because so many agents, law enforcement agents, weren't doing law enforcement. They were inside processing. Unfortunately, those gaps continue to grow because the administration keeps doubling down. We have sued over parole. We won the lawsuit. Actually, we sued over something they called NTR, which I can tell you was made up. I could pull 6 items off my refrigerator that my daughter drew and stick them in a folder, and they would have more legal standing than what the NTR was. We sued over that. We won. They were forbidden from doing that. They added 2 more forms to the NTR and called it something new. It was pro rapid release or something like that. Sued over that. We were able to win that. They added a few more forms, and now they call it something else. And so, if not for Texas, who, and if not now, when, the amount of fentanyl, enough fentanyl we used to send enough fentanyl to kill every man, woman, and child in America. It's multiple times over now. It is absurd, the amount. You hear weapons don't come north. It's not true. We see lots of weapons coming north. And so, we're filling those gaps. Obviously, there's question of whether we can put C-wire in it. That's where I came from last night. We have. There's questions about whether we have the authority to do so, and that's in front of the courts right now. And the courts all fit to give us a temporary restraining order against the federal government from damaging that. And so I believe that we're on good legal standing. And absent losing in court, we're going to, again, continue to do everything we can to secure Texas and the rest of the United States.
Thank you.
So I agree. I believe we absolutely do have the authority to do it. Of course, we're hoping in a couple of these cases that that the courts affirm that. I know Mike was at one of those hearings last night or yesterday afternoon. But everything we're doing, I believe we absolutely have the authority to do. One of the best things that I think that, one of the best tactics I think we've come up with, and I know Mike had a lot to do with this, is the buoys. And the buoys represent, in my opinion, the first tactic that we have done as a state to make sure that we deter them from coming in, from ever coming in. All of the other tactics deal with them after they have already come in. And so we're hoping that the courts will affirm that, and I think we're prepared as a state to deploy way more buoys as soon as we can get this affirmed in the court system. But again, it's something that we're compelled to do because the federal government is not helping us do it. And I think that the court system will take our side, and in some of these cases where it's being challenged in court. But hopefully at some point the federal government will step in and do it for us. But in the meantime, we'll do it.
I want to add one thing real quick. We talked about the drugs and the weapons. One thing that I considered a huge success, and I think is very important to notice. So Texas is 1,254 miles of the U.S.-Mexico border, right, the land border. That equates for actually 62% of the total land border from Arizona, from California. So I did a 7-day average because I had to have this number for court yesterday. 7-day average, look at the last 7 days in the state of Texas. 39% or 36% of all of the entries came in Texas, and that's 62% of the border. Arizona, Tucson sector alone, every other day is seeing more entries than the entire state of Texas. 38% of the border. And why is that? And I'm going to stand here and tell you that I firmly believe it's because of the efforts of Lone Star. It's the efforts of the legislators giving us additional powers to offer consequences. And one thing I learned from day one, and I won't go into the story, I'll share it with you on the side if you want to hear it, but I've always learned that illegal migration is always going to follow the path of least resistance. And so I said on day one when I came on, I wanted to make Texas the least desirable place for illegal immigration to take place. And I believe that we are moving in that direction. I believe with every new bill we get from legislation that we can offer more consequences, with every new mile of wire we put down, every time we stand up against the federal government, we're making Texas less desirable. And I think you can look at that stat. I cannot remember in my career when Texas didn't lead in illegal immigration simply because it's the closest path to South and Central America. And so 39% of all the apprehensions over a 7-day period, while we own 62% of the border, we're moving in the right direction. Lone Star's working, the legislation's working.
Thank you. And if I may add, before we go to Q&A, a core role of the government is to protect its citizens. The federal government is failing phenomenally, and Texas is doing just the right thing. So thank you. We're going to go to Q&A.
Good morning. Terrific discussion. I want to focus on the linking of security with trade. And I think the question to the gentleman from the business community is that the American business community doesn't realize that you cannot separate legal trade from the criminality in Mexico. The extortion that the underworld in Mexico engages in includes legal trade and all the freight forwarding, warehousing, and everything else that is involved in moving trade and investment across the border, including American investment in Mexico. We talk here in this discussion about migrant smuggling, narcotics, et cetera. Mexicans will tell us all about the extortion in Mexico. So how does the American community, the business community, propose to continue to trade with Mexico when we should realize that that trade is in fact increasing the criminality and the lack of rule of law in Mexico?
I completely disagree. We have $285 billion of trade between Mexico and Texas directly. 500,000 Texans, their jobs, their employment is connected to legal, lawful commerce with Mexico. And by the way, as these security efforts have ramped up, and Mr. Banks, I've learned a tremendous amount from you, and the job you're doing is good. I mean, the more security we have, the more trade we're going to have. Trade between Mexico and Texas, even with all these other issues that are very challenging going on, increased $50 billion in the past year. There are very strong laws when it comes to money laundering and other types of things. When we're talking about trade, what are we talking about? We build cars together. Take a look at the Tesla plant here. I think that's a pretty good thing. They're building a gigafactory in Monterey. Take a look at a lot of what's going on in terms of consumer electronics. It's the supply chains in Mexico that make us regionally much more competitive than we would be. We need to continue to work to secure the border. I think the federal government should give Texas a nice big check with lots of zeros on it for all the work that the legislature, the governor, and Mr. Banks and others have done. But we absolutely have to continue to go down the path of legal trade. If we didn't have that type of trade, it would harm our economy. 5% of the $2.3 trillion Texas economy is tied to trade with Mexico. It's a greater percentage than any other state. So we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and we're going to continue to work to advance and support security measures while we support increasing legal trade. And final point, Texas is the largest export state in the country. We love bragging about that. 21 straight years, more exports than any other state. We export more than New York, California, and Louisiana combined. So we need to absolutely continue that. And I don't know if your delicious pecans go to Mexico and other countries or not. I know we eat a lot of them, but we have a lot of Texas companies that want to continue to do business, and we have a lot of great Mexican-based companies like Bimbo, like Cemex, the list would go on, that have strong operations, legal operations in the state of Texas, and are investing billions of dollars to keep Texas as the top state in the country.
Just to jump in, yes, pecan industry actually is booming right now in El Paso. It's become the beehive of the pecan export. All of the guys out of Georgia are now moving to El Paso, building warehouses and storing pecans and moving them straight through Mexico. So through all of this craziness, yes, commerce is growing, especially in my industry.
Hi, my name is Christina, and I'm from Convention of States. I hear a lot of talk about the gangs and the cartels. However, my focus is with higher education. In 2021, the Department of Education statistics for Texas college enrollment says that Hispanic or Latino students have surpassed white enrollment in colleges. And a lot of our professors, including Texas colleges and universities, are radicalizing our students, and Hispanic and Latino students are prime targets for this type of radicalization with Mexican education curriculums and other liberal arts, and now we're starting to see it in political curriculums across Texas colleges and universities. Are there any plans to also deal with this radicalization of emerging DACA students within Texas colleges and universities?
Well, we did pass a couple bills this session to reform DEI in colleges and to also reform tenure of college professors in colleges. So the legislature has begun to take that up, and by passing these bills has recognized that there is a problem, and taken some steps to address it. And I'm sure that as we move forward, we'll continue to monitor the situation and see if what else needs to be done.
I would like to add to that. As running for Texas State Board of Education, right now there's 15 seats, and usually the vote comes down to 8-7. 7 are the liberal. I think that's where we come in. We need to run for state board. We need to run for our local school boards. We need to get involved, because even though there is some legislation, the teachers themselves are teaching liberally, and they're indoctrinating our kids. And that's why I homeschooled, and that's why homeschool is booming here. I think there was a 700% increase during COVID, and of that 700%, only like 32% went back. So we really, in Texas, need to take that step here in this room to get people involved in the education of our younger generation and stop them from indoctrinating them. I think that's the only step where we can start at that level, because the public school kids are already completely zombified, that's what I call it, because they cannot think outside the box. So when my children transition into public school, the teachers are like, wow, it's so amazing. They think outside and they have all these other perspectives. Well, that's because of that education they received at a younger age.
I just want to expand on something that Mr. Banks said about Arizona. The things that Texas has going on is because you guys are spending $9 billion a year on the border. Arizona is not spending nearly a fraction of that. Arizona doesn't only lead in bodies coming across, they also lead in fentanyl coming across the United States. It's the gateway to the United States. There's so many things that play a part in the difference between Texas and Arizona. Is we don't have the violence you guys have either on the border in Texas, because one cartel controls that border. You don't have multiple factions fighting for different plazas. It's just one cartel that controls it. But that can change, because once Texas puts a control on the Texas border, that's going to move slowly west. And Jason Jones and I have both predicted it in the last year. and we're seeing that shift and that tripwire now.
You're absolutely right. And so the less Arizona does and the more we do, the bigger problem you're going to have over there. I came here from Arizona. I was in Ajo, right? And Ajo, Arizona was 99% narcotic. You didn't see human trafficking out there because of where it's at. You would get off work on a Friday, call a group of Godaway, a group of Packers. You come back on Monday morning, get right back on that group because they were 8 to 15 days of hiking. And now you've got family units going out there, right? Because the cartel has really gotten into the human smuggling business because of it. And you're absolutely right. And so what we hope is when Arizona, California, New Mexico are having to deal with the numbers that Texas has, hopefully the people in Arizona are going to start rising up against, to their demanding there, if you will. I mean, Arizona up until the last election, they were out there putting out, Connex boxes. They were doing some of the very same things we were doing. But you're right. One state's success is going to be another state's downfall. But I think at some point Arizonans are going to open their eyes, and more of them. Not that there aren't ones that are there, but it's going to force other states to come to the table and do something. And so if that's what we got to do to get the border under control, we can't wait around the federal government. I mean, I'm not going to wait and hope, that usually doesn't work out very well. So, but sorry, not sorry, but you're absolutely right. And so, but that's my intent. My intent is to continue making it less desirable, and if they go to the other desirable locations, I'd love for none to come in. I mean, 30 plus years in uniform of one form or another for the United States government. Right now I got to focus on Texas and do everything I can for Texas.
I want to follow up by saying, from the legislature's perspective, I'm glad to hear that, and I think that it points to our success and the fact that we're having an impact, and hopefully the rest of the states on the Texas-Mexico border would follow suit.
I think we are out of time, unfortunately. I would like just very briefly to give the opportunity to each of our panelists to close. We have a tradition at TPPF. We'd like to close on an optimistic note. So could you each tell me briefly why you remain optimistic for the future for Texas?
I think I remain optimistic because of the Mexican people, and of course that's my heritage. There's still very good people out there, and they want an end to this too. And I think if we just stand up, I would actually pose a question: is do we have the legal authority to just shut the border down and just leave it open for commerce? That's it, just no more. I wish that would be an option for Texas. I don't know if it's legal, but I think we should think about it and just push everything to Arizona and New Mexico and take care of ourselves, because that's the only hope we have to sustain any kind of real safety here. Thank you.
I'm optimistic because it's definitely possible to increase border security dramatically while increasing legal trade, and appreciate TPPF putting together this important forum this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm optimistic because I think that the state of Texas is booming. We continue to boom. Our trade with Mexico continues to skyrocket and increase despite the challenges that we have. But our economy is growing. Texas is doing well. And I think any forecast that you see continues to say that we're going to continue to do well. Just recently, the comptroller announced that he expects another $18 billion surplus in the current biennium that we're in. Another indicator that we're doing something right. And I look forward to continue to work with TPPF and Texas Association of Business and our law enforcement community to continue to make sure that Texas continues to grow, continues to prosper, and continues to be a great place to live, work, and raise a family.
Thank you.
So I'm optimistic because of a couple of things. One, we have a governor that listens. You know, oftentimes we talk about the borders like that's what I hired you for. What do we need to do, right? And then we've got legislators that aren't afraid to step up and make some tough decisions and pass some laws, understanding that sometimes those laws are going to be challenged. So be it. That's the environment we live in, right? You've got to be willing to put it out there. And so, and I'm optimistic also because over the last year, as I've seen Texas start gaining ground on the illegal immigration, on the fentanyl, on the trafficking, we start getting a lot of the naysayers that said Texas can't do it, Texas can't do it, and they start seeing these successes, and they come back, and now they're starting to get on board and saying, okay, maybe this does work, maybe you can do this. And I will challenge, or not challenge, I'll answer your question. That's what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing. We're doing it 1 mile at a time. You know, it takes time and effort. And the other thing that I think makes me really optimistic is we've had 24 governors outside of the state of Texas agree to support Texas in our mission. 14 of those governors have already sent soldiers and law enforcement from state, and they've done so at a cost to their state because they understand what's coming through Texas is affecting their states, and they've committed to continue doing that. The last time they asked how long, and I said, well, until we stop violating laws with policies. When the federal government gets back to the table and does their job, we're going to be in this fight, and we're prepared to be in for the long haul. And so they've literally broken it down on how they're going to give us that support so that they can continue to maintain that support. And so when other states are going to their people and saying, we need money to send troops and people in law enforcement to another state to help, and they're overwhelmingly doing it, that's optimistic because it's really bringing to the attention to the rest of the country. This isn't a Texas problem. This is an American problem, and you know we're starting to see people come up. I just saw, as you were saying in Arizona, I saw a bunch of senators and congressmen down there, and they were raising red flags and screaming and hollering, going, wait, time out, time out. And so hopefully it wasn't just a Codell show, but it appears they're starting to realize that that flow getting pushed there is causing problems for them too. And so we're going to keep pushing, and you know we're going to get through it. This too shall pass, but it's just going to be a lot of hard work. But we're going to get it done, and I'm optimistic.
Thank you very much. I want to thank each one of you for everything you're doing for Texans and for Texas, and thanks for taking the time to come here today and share your experience and your expertise. Please help me thank our panelists.
Thank you.
The next panel is going to start at 10:35, so you have 10 minutes break. It's going to be my colleague Celine Rodriguez will be moderating this panel, and it's going to focus on the U.S.-Mexico relationship.
Back for our second panel of the day, and thank you to everyone who's tuning in online. We're very happy to have you with some really special guests here today on our U.S.-Mexico relationship panel. I've got some great friends here of the foundation that I am happy to introduce to you. First off, Mark Morgan. Mark has over 30 years of law enforcement experience, including the acting commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection in the Obama administration, and was acting director of U.S. Customs Enforcement. Leading up to this, he had a 20-year career with the FBI. But the main reason that I keep inviting Mark back for these fun conversations is because, like me, he served in the Marine Corps. Wow. So Semper Fi, Mark, and welcome back. If you could please help me welcome Mark. Simon.
I've never worn fuchsia. Is that fuchsia? What is that?
I couldn't tell. It's pink. It's Wednesday, so we wear pink. Simon, over here at the end, Simon Hankinson is a senior research fellow in the Border Security and Immigration Center at the Heritage Foundation. From 1993 to 2003, he was a foreign service officer serving in India, Fiji, Ghana, Slovakia, Togo, and Washington, D.C. And Nairobi. Prior to entering the State Department, he worked as a lawyer in London and then taught history, English, and drama at a private school in Miami. Simon, welcome, and thank you for being here with us today. Finally, here in the middle, we have Andres Martinez Fernandez, who is the Senior Policy Analyst for Latin America at the Heritage Foundation as well, at their Douglas and Sarah Allison Center for Foreign Policy. In this role, he leads the Heritage Foundation's work on U.S. policy towards Latin America, and before joining Heritage, he was an analyst at a leading global market intelligence firm where he advised top executives from multinational companies on political and macroeconomic risks in Latin America. Prior to that, he was a researcher at the American Enterprise, and he also worked as a consultant on the Organization of the American States and political groups in Latin America. Andres, thank you for joining us today. So we've got a great panel here, a lot of information that they're going to share, so let's just dive right into that. Mark, I'm going to start with you. Anyone who's listened to you speak knows that you'll say over the past 30 years, you've seen presidents take increasing steps to secure the border, whether that be building infrastructure, supporting law enforcement, border patrol. But obviously, something has changed over these last few years because we've seen records in apprehensions, fentanyl seizures, weapons, you name it, gotaways from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 23, and that number continues to grow. So can you tell us what has changed from the U.S. federal government from when you started your career in law enforcement to today that's led to this disaster?
Everything, right? Look, I'm not trying to be facetious, but let's back up a little bit too, because I think it's very important. When we look at Mexico right now, I think we need to be honest, and we need to be honest when we're talking about the national security risk, but also the economy issues as well. Mexico right now, they're not a legitimate partner, and I believe we need to stop looking at them as a legitimate partner across the board, right? Last year, 112,000 Americans died from drug overdose and fentanyl. Right now, illegal immigration costs this country $180 billion. Right? We know in Texas alone, from 2011 to 2022, 287,000 illegal aliens committed over 400,000 crimes, including thousands of homicides, kidnappings, and thousands of sexual assaults in the state of Texas alone. We know the last 34 months, 2,000 migrants died at our border, recovered by CBP alone, not including those that died in Mexico or those that died in the Darien Gap. We know that 30% of young women and children are sexually assaulted on their journey up here. We know even after illegal aliens making the way in the United States, that many of them are thrust into life of labor or sex trafficking. The only thing that Mexico, so when we talk about, oh yeah, it's okay, Mexico, you know, they care about, no. They're not a legitimate partner right now. And the one thing that we did under the Trump administration, set aside, this is just reality and fact. I was there, I was on the front line. Where's Rodney? Rodney, you here? He stepped out. I was gonna call him up too. He can support this or not. But look, here's the first thing that we did, right, in the Trump administration, is we looked at Mexico and we said, and we were honest, they're not legitimate partners, right? But yet we have developed this reliance on both countries on the economic side. So that's undeniable. I got that. I'm not denying that, right? So one thing I'll say, part of our long-term strategy, maybe we should start to rely less on our economy with Mexico, right? Because we're talking about, Texas Public Policy did a great analysis where they said we should call the cartels a terrorist organization, right? But yet we're partners with a nation that harbors and sponsors what we say is a terrorist organization. On what planet does that make sense? That we're looking to a nation that we say is harboring, facilitating, and profiting from what we want to call a terrorist organization, but we're actually going to call them a legitimate partner? I think that's insanity. So one of the first things that we did on the Trump administration, we woke up and we came from a position of honesty, leverage, and strength. And we said, Mexico, you're going to step up and address this as the regional crisis that it is. You're going to do your part. And if not, then we're not going to wait for you to do our job to secure our border. We're going to take unilateral action. And I know you all remember what that was, right? It was one tweet from President Trump, tariffs, right? Shockingly, I was there. Literally overnight, it dramatically changed. The entire landscape changed on a multi-level. One, from a Mexico border security strategy from a resource standpoint. At one point at the height, they had over 20,000 personnel, all of a sudden out of blue, dedicated to their own border security. They started securing their southern border that they shared with Guatemala. They ramped up interior enforcement, right? Instead of letting buses literally working with activists and facilitating buses going from Guatemala, from their southern border, all the way up to our border, that stopped. Caravans stopped. Intelligence sharing started going up. Shared patrols on our shared border with Mexico went up. Mexico started increasing their interior enforcement. It went up across the board. You actually recognized that they were not a legitimate partner, that they were harboring and sponsoring what everybody wants to call a terrorist organization that's decimating our national safety and security. And so we said, okay, we're going to leverage the economy, right? We're going to leverage that. And yeah, it could do us some harm, but it's going to devastate their GDP. Shocker, they stepped up. Unprecedented level of cooperation from a resource perspective. Then, from a policy perspective, the Remain in Mexico program, never done in the history. One of the biggest things that we had to take away from bad law, the Florida Settlement Agreement, Judge G is the worst judge in American history. She single-handedly created a decision that would devastate our ability to actually secure our border by reducing illegal immigration. But what we said was, because this is what happened, come to our border, especially if you're family, that's your Willy Wonka ticket, right? Released in the United States, and so more came. The Remain in Mexico program, that program single-handedly cut off the one thing that they wanted, and that was to be released in the United States. And Mexico supported it. And it was a lot. They put a monumental level of resources into supporting the Remain in Mexico program. Facilities on their side, the coordination daily, going back and forth to courts. And by February of 2020, illegal immigration had been reduced by 85%. And here's the key that a lot of people don't realize. We only enrolled about 65,000 people in the Remain in Mexico program. And so a lot of people say, well, see, Mark, you hardly put anybody in it. It really wasn't that effective. I said, yeah, except you forgot. 600,000 less came, right? Because they knew they weren't going to be released. It was instrumental. And then, by that time, remember, so COVID was coming in 2020. And so we had already set up this incredible system and this incredible coordination with Mexico through the Remain in Mexico program. And so then when we instituted Title 42, it was an easy shift. Think about it. At that time, basically anybody that was illegally entering our border, we were simply right on the border, turning them back around. And Mexico was full partners on that. So we actually came from a position of strength. We leveraged that. We recognized the importance of the economy to both nations, but especially their nations. And we leveraged that, and we forced them and drove them to stand up as the regional partners that they would. And it also had outreach beyond just Mexico. All three Northern Triangle countries, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, all of a sudden, they started getting pressure. Guess who was putting pressure on them? Mexico, right? Mexico was like, hey, we're doing our part. You start doing your part. Stop them from coming across the Guatemala-Mexico border. Shocker. That never happened before, but it was happening now. the asylum cooperative agreements. We started with Guatemala, and then by the end, we had all 3 Northern Triangle countries. We were actually flying people that transited through Guatemala, which said, I'm a safe third country, and they were coming to our border. We were saying, nope, you're going right back to Guatemala. And Guatemala was receiving them. And I was there, and all the BS about all the facilities are not good, it was all a bunch of lies. I was there. I actually watched planes. I actually watched the facilities. I saw them. I saw the busloads we were bringing back and how they were being processed, how they actually had a center in one of the facilities trying to find them jobs. They were feeding them the whole 9 yards. USAID was involved, ICE was involved, State Department was involved. A tremendous amount of funding and resources that went into helping all 3 Northern Triangle countries to implement the ACAs. It was working. It was working. When I was a commissioner, I'll shut up here. So when I was a commissioner, at the end, I remember I had the screen in my office every day, every minute. The numbers were updating. Rodney hated it because I was watching it constantly, and so I was always calling him, right, as the numbers would change. He'd be like, "Mark, stop! You can't call me every 5 minutes when the numbers change." But I still remember this day, because remember when Secretary Jay Johnson under the Obama administration, remember when he said, 1,000 a day is a bad day. Remember that? 1,000 a day. I just got the stats. We're still at 6,000 a day right now. 1,000 a day. And that became kind of the test, you know? And I remember sitting the commissioner the day in the beginning of 2020, when I looked up and I saw the number, it was 800. We had broken the 1,000. We hadn't been there in a very long time. And guess what else? Unaccompanied minors. I'll never forget it. The number for a day dropped to 8. 8 in a day. In the past 34 months, we've had 340,000 unaccompanied minors come to our border. 340,000 kids that self-separated from their own families made that decision because this administration has said, if you get to our border, we're going to let you in, never to be heard from again. So what changed is all of that. On day one, our country jettisoned the leverage that we had, that we came from a position of strength. The Remain in Mexico program, the single-handedly most important policy that we had in place that took away one of the most important incentives, that mean we ended catch and release. You will no longer be released. And every time you do that, the flow of illegal immigration will go down. More border patrol agents will get back on the front line to do their law enforcement and national security mission, and our country's more safe. This administration on day one ended that. Ended that. Remain in Mexico program, gone. The Asylum Safe Third Country agreements, gone. All of it. And so Mexico went right back to where they were. And that's where we're at right now. Literally facilitating caravans. We're literally putting people on trains, letting them come up. Putting them on buses, letting them come up. Literally standing by as our border is wide open. So that's why I say everything changed. This administration took the most secure border in our lifetime, and they intentionally unsecured it. And this country better wake up. Right now, with everything going on in the Middle East war, taught us 2 things. One, global terrorism is alive and well. And the same Islamic extremists that carried out the attacks in Israel want to do harm to our country. And 2 was a colossal intelligence failure. And if you think that our United States intelligence is infallible, we're living in a dream world. It's the best in the world, but we're not infallible. I'll leave with this and I will shut up. So 1.7 million known gotaways in the past. That's another thing that's changed, right? Gotaways. 1.7 million known gotaways in the past 34 months. I'd like to ask our intelligence community 3 questions. 3 questions. How many illegal aliens on the FBI's terror watch list are among the 1.7 million known gotaways? Their answer, they don't know. How many special interest aliens that we know come from countries that sponsor, facilitate, and harbor terrorism are among the 1.7 million known gotaways? Answer, they don't know. Can you guarantee me, U.S. intelligence community, that a sleeper cell didn't come in along with the 1.7 million known gotaways and are in the country right now planning this terrorist attack? Can you tell us that's not happening? Our intelligence community, the answer, don't know. So everything changed, and it changed for the worst.
Well, that concludes our panel for today. Thank you for coming. No, Simon, I'll kick it over to you. What Mark was saying about Remain in Mexico, you said only 65,000 people actually came through with that program. Well, now we have a very different sort of visa program that this administration has put in place. I want to quote something that you wrote recently. Biden has allowed more illegal aliens to enter the U.S. in his 2 years in office than we've welcomed actual refugees in 42 years. There is no sign of this flood ending. In fact, Biden's DHS is ramping up its parole programs, which, despite the clever spin of calling them lawful pathways, are not specifically permitted or funded in our actual laws. So this idea of legal pathways that we're seeing today, every time someone in this administration testifies before Congress, they say, well, we just want to extend the legal pathways, which we know those are not legal pathways. So can you talk to us? You've written a lot about this topic. What are these new legal, not legal pathways, and how is the federal government using those to just bring in more people?
Sure. Well, let me start with a quick analogy. We've got a lot of places in D.C., our big cities, where there's a shoplifting problem, right? People are coming in, they're cleaning out the CVS. So there are three things you can do. One, you can prosecute people who steal, right? Shoplifters. That's not happening because of a whole different question of rogue prosecutors and ideology. Two, you can lock up the valuables, lock up the batteries and the shampoo, whatever it is that people are stealing. Three, the dumbest thing that you wouldn't do is you can hurriedly restock the shelves with all the valuables as quickly as possible. That's what the Biden administration is doing with immigration. That is their strategy. Rather than deterring and detaining and deporting people, they're processing them, paroling them, and punting them into the interior. Not many of them stay in Texas, which is fortunate for Texas. They go to Chicago, they go to New York, but they do cause incredible costs. And parole is the little magic trick that they found to take care of this. Parole is meant to be, it is in the Immigration and Nationality Act. It's meant to be used for significant public benefit and humanitarian reasons. And Congress clarified that in 1996 because they wanted to make sure it wasn't used as a backdoor refugee program. But this administration has just chosen to completely ignore that. And instead of a couple hundred cases a year, they're using it en masse for entire countries: Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and amazingly, Mexico. 55,000 people from Mexico were paroled in on the assumption that they're then going to claim asylum. But we know that 6 or 7% of Mexicans do not qualify for asylum because Mexico, despite its problems, has plenty of places you can go and be safe. So this whole thing is a house of cards, and I'll give a shout out to Texas. Texas has yet again sued the federal government, along with I think 25 other states, to just call this out for what it is. It's utter garbage. These are not lawful pathways. They're made up, but this is their strategy. They do something that they know is illegal, like student loan giveaways or this, and then they just wait to get sued and hope they get away with it long enough. And so far, they have gotten away with it for 500,000 people in 2.5 years.
So these people that are coming in and they're being paroled, they're getting the notice to disappear, as we like to call them, for 2027, 2028. About how many people right now are on that list that have been paroled in what this administration is saying legally?
It's really difficult to tell because CBP, DHS does not like to reveal these statistics. There was a good report out last week, I think, that said it was something like 266,000 people paroled under the kind of front hand program that they've been talking about, but then like another 200,000 on the back end in a program including these Mexicans and like 5,000 Russians and people from a whole bunch of countries that have either active terrorist groups or are not our friends, including a couple European countries, bizarrely, where people are supposed to not need visas. So if I had to guess, I'd say 500,000. But the scary thing is this is an open door that they've pushed on. If they can do parole for Mexico illegally, well, why not the Philippines or India or you just name a country, China? There was a line I read yesterday of President Carter talking about human rights with Chairman Mao and trying to pressure him. And Chairman Mao said, well, you said you want Chinese to be able to leave the country freely. How many would you like? And apparently that shut Carter up. If this isn't a blank check and it's unlimited, the number of people that could benefit from these made-up parole programs is theoretically infinite.
So it sounds like we're just going to keep paroling more and more people and not even really know who they are. Like was said on the last panel, if you come in and you turn in a name, it doesn't necessarily have to be your name. Welcome to America. Here's your new name. Nice. Well, Andres, I'm going to shift over to you. And I want to shift over a little bit into the criminal aspect that the federal government is facing in Mexico. We have a lot of research, and my colleagues Josh and Melissa talk often on their Hard Country podcast about the cartel organizations, what's going on down there, and how AMLO, the president in Mexico, has made it more difficult for U.S. to crack down on cartel operations within the country, specifically for the DEA. So we've seen high-level U.S. officials going down to Mexico, I think 3 times now, and they come back with all this optimism. We're making all these changes. We have agreements made. We don't really see anything that comes of those agreements. So do you feel optimistic that the U.S. will be able to crack down on those organizations, and is anything really coming out of those high-level security talks that they're having?
Thanks. No, I mean, I think your colleagues are right to be pessimistic about the situation on security cooperation. If you want to understand the state of U.S.-Mexico security cooperation, you just have to know that at this last high-level security dialogue, next to Anthony Blinken and all these high-level officials, the Mexican Minister of Interior denied that fentanyl was being produced in Mexico. You know, if we can't even have the starting point of recognition of the issue, and how are we going to tackle this huge challenge, which is both on the U.S. and Mexico side, there's insufficient action on this front. But in particular in Mexico, you know, we're seeing it's the degradation of security cooperation over the past few years is extremely worrying. We talked about the DEA presence, extremely limited, particularly following the arrest of the former Minister of Defense, Salvador Cienfuegos. That unleashed a wave of backlash on the Mexican side as far as targeting DEA operations. And since then, we haven't really recovered even the previous level of very problematic security cooperation. We have standing offer, for example, for bolstering port security in Mexico to identify with technology and different expertise the inflow of precursor chemicals, which has been on the table and ignored. We have a cooperation as far as operation and intelligence sharing, which is minimal and certainly nowhere near the task required to combat what is a continually increasing inflow. We had fentanyl interdictions for this fiscal year, double the previous fiscal year, and triple the year before that. So the challenge is continuing to increase, and the cooperation is non-existent. You know, one of the big issues that I see at the heart of this is corruption in Mexico. I think it's as we were just saying, the partner is not up to the task at this point. We mentioned Salvador Cienfuegos. He's the former Minister of Defense, arrested for working with cartels to facilitate narco trafficking to the United States. He's not the only high-level official that we've had arrested, and he wasn't under the current government. He was a previous Minister of Defense. So we have this kind of perennial corruption, which is growing within Mexico, which leaves us without partners that are reliable in confronting this task. And then at the same time, the U.S. is not pushing on this issue. There's these high-level dialogues that go on. Is very much for show, I think, primarily, because what ends up happening is that at the end of the day, we have the ministers saying, well, we don't even produce fentanyl, and then everyone goes home. But in terms of actually increasing cooperation, we're not seeing that, and we're seeing the consequences here in the United States with tens of thousands dead.
If I could jump in there real quick. So Am I on? Yeah. So first of all, agree. 20 years in the FBI, especially in charge of El Paso division. From my office window, I could see Juarez. So, yep, know a few things about the cartels. Here's what I can tell you. For 35 years, the United States government has approached the cartels with the same traditional criminal enterprise theory of investigation. And for 35 years, it's been a colossal failure, right? We, the United States, have to fundamentally change how we go after the cartels. Now, again, there's a lot of debate and discussion whether we should formally call them a terrorist organization. There's pros and cons for that. That's for another discussion. But here's what is absolutely correct, and I say I subscribe to the Bill Barr theory, is we need to go after we need to fundamentally change how we go after the cartels. We need to go after them with the same level of commitment, tenacity, whole of government strategy that we do a terrorist organization. Who cares what you call them? The best would be a Plan Colombia, where we work with it, right? They went after FARC. It was very successful. It'd be great. We work with Mexico. We devastate the cartels. We defeat the cartels. We let Mexico be the only ones at the podium and take credit. That's great. But the last time I checked, we don't need the permission from another country to protect our own country. And to footstomp what you said, we know, our intelligence, we know where all the ports of entry are, where all the precursor chemicals are coming from China and Mexico. We know where they're at. We know where every super meth lab is in Mexico. We know every single cartel. We know where their strongholds are. We know the routes. We know everything. So why do we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again? Even if we get a conservative back in the White House and we fundamentally shift policies 180 degrees, right? And we have America First policies and we put the resources down there, right? Infrastructure, technology, and personnel, along with that second part of the multi-layer strategy of policy that actually has laws that allows those on the front lines to protect our borders. Even if we have all of that, we bring it all back to we under the Trump administration, we will never have a secure border until we defeat the cartels. Their ability to change their TTPs, their tactics, techniques, and procedures. They could rival a 500 Fortune company. They could teach a business school at Yale or Harvard at business resiliency and flexibility. Every time we change, every time we identify one of their tactics and techniques, they change it. They're going to use the air, ground, and sea. They're doing it now. The cartels just developed a drone unit, a tactical drone unit that would rival many nations' capabilities. So at the end of the day, I agree. All this going down there, it's all photo ops, it's all shows. This administration, they keep saying, oh yeah, we're going to get really tough on going after traffickers. How stupid, right? And you're like, wait a minute, Mark, that's a good thing, right? No, what do we learn from 9/11? We have to shift from a reactive, right, law enforcement mindset and go to a threat-based, intelligence-driven, proactive, preventative measure. You don't react after the traffic has already happened. You prevent the traffic from happening. That's the goal. And how do you do that? Secure our damn border, right? De-incentivize it. Stop the flow from coming. That's how you stop it. And until we change fundamentally as a United States, how are we going after the cartels? Because at the end of the day, here's what we transitioned from Mexico. At one point, they didn't have the political will. They're corrupt. Failed narco state in many areas, right? They were just corrupt. They didn't have the political will. They weren't honest partners. Never have been. But now it's beyond that. Because now, not only do they not have the political will to defeat the cartels, they don't have the capacity to do it now. It's the worst it's ever been. The only thing that's happened in the past 35 years of cartels, they've gotten more powerful, stronger, more influential, and their bank accounts have grown, and their business has gone worldwide. We have to shift.
With that, Mark, what you just said about how their business has grown, we hear a lot now that the cartels are not just drug traffickers, they're not just human traffickers. This is a multi-billion-dollar business that's growing every week, every month, every year, especially under this administration. Andres, you've written extensively on dismantling those financial institutions that the cartels are building up, how you think that should happen in Mexico. But I'm curious, do you see that the U.S. is doing anything to dismantle cartel funding and the financial institutions that they're building in Mexico?
Not nearly enough. And to understand the scope of illicit financial networks, it's to really see the level of the challenge that we face, because these aren't banks in Mexico that are isolated. This is financial transactions that occur in Mexico. They're mirrored in China, and you have money flowing across the world within seconds, and that's continually reinforcing and facilitating all the illicit activity, from drug trafficking to extortion to migrant smuggling. All of this is not nearly to the level where it needs to be, and I think that's one of the big failings. You know, we shifted a lot of our financial intelligence capabilities towards terrorism after 9/11, and that was extremely important. But the result was that we took a lot of that away from the focus on drug traffickers, and all that time we've seen them bolster their capabilities to expand their operations, expand the financial complexities of their networks, and we still haven't returned that focus towards this increasing threat that we're seeing, particularly within our own hemisphere. That's one of the big failings that we have, and one of the things that we still have not remedied, and we need to do that immediately.
Thank you for that. I want to shift over to the humanitarian aspect of what's happening at the border and how the federal government and the Mexican government are responding to that. We hear a lot of times that Mexico will say, well, it's not humanitarian, you're anti-immigrant, you're anti-this. If you try to put barriers along our border, we want you to respect our sovereignty and respect the people that just want amnesty. But really, we've seen how that's turned over millions of people to cartel human smuggling. They become victims of assault, rape, what have you, no matter who they are, how old they are. So can you talk about how, Mark, I'll let you handle this one first, with everything that the state of Texas might do to secure the border, with everything that the federal government might do or not do, how is it humanitarian and better for the people that want to come across if we put those in place?
Yeah, this is one of the biggest lies. Secretary Mayorkas, it's hard to keep track. I always say, you know how Secretary Mayorkas is lying? His lips are moving, right? It's really hard for me to keep up with all the lies that Secretary Mayorkas says. One of the biggest ones is he's developed a safe, orderly, and humane illegal immigration process, right? First of all, it's an oxymoron, and it's just a lie. And there's a couple of gentlemen right back there, you know, Mike and Banks and Rodney Scott, who lived this, right? They interview people, and I've talked to countless Border Patrol agents whose lives will never be the same. You know, and I've talked to some guys that are pretty tough, and women pretty tough on the front lines. And as they're talking to me, their eyes start to well up as they talk to a 14-year-old that was raped multiple times on the journey up here. Tom Holman, another great patriot. It's been probably 15, 16 years since he opened the back of a tractor trailer and saw it filled with dead bodies, including children. And he's about as tough as they come. And to this day, when he talks about it, he still wells up, chokes up. And it's hard for him to get through. Their lives will never be the same. How many times did the mainstream media talk about that, right? Or how about the sheriff deputy that said the 12-year-old emptied her backpack and a bag of pills fell out? He said, what's this? Morning after pill. From my mother, because she was assuming that I was going to be raped on the journey up here. Or the story of another sheriff that said, you know, I was talking to a woman and she told me how she'd been raped multiple times, and one time she was pulled away. And when they brought her back after she'd been raped multiple times, there was another female in their group that wasn't there. And a couple minutes later, she heard a gunshot. A couple of smugglers came back and said, "Vámonos, let's go, let's go." That woman never returned. I mean, these stories on and on and on. We could talk for the next 10 hours for this. But you never hear about that. Never. I said before, the last 34 months, 2,000 dead migrants. There's a war in the Middle East going on right now, which I fully support, and 1,400 died. 2,000 dead migrants. When's the last time anybody on the mainstream media said that number? Never. Never. Or what about non-governmental organization, Doctors Without Borders said 30% of young women and children are sexually assaulted and raped in journey up here, right? Never mentioned. Or after they get here, and everybody here knows how it works. Hey, it's $8,000 to smuggle you across. I only have $4,000. No problem. Once you get you across, you can work it. You can pay us later, right? They get here. A week later, knock on the hotel door. Where's the $4,000? I don't have it. No problem. Here's how you're going to pay it off. The life of labor and sex trafficking begins. This administration right now, conservative, they said 340,000 UACs, somewhere between 85 to 100,000 unaccompanied minors they've lost track of. They don't even know where they are. But we know where some of them are because it's been reported, right? 12-year-old working at midnight shift at a meatpacking plant cleaning up entrails, right? There is nothing humane with an open border. We know that as they're exploited and assaulted, they're kept in overcrowded, unsanitary stash houses. They're literally treated like animals. They're a commodity. 20 pounds of marijuana or 20 illegal aliens is the same to the cartels. I mean, this is absurd what we're doing right now. Our compassion has been hijacked. If you actually care about migrants, if you truly care about migrants and not your ideology, not your political talking points, you'll secure our damn border. Right now, think about it. In the last 34 months, 7.7 million total nationwide encounters. 7.7 million total nationwide encounters. 1.7 million total known gotaways in 34 months. Think about how many more young kids and women were raped because of this administration. Think about how many more women and young kids are thrust into the life of trafficking. Unaccompanied minors, you know what the average age of unaccompanied minor, the 340,000 coming across? 15 to 17. You know what the average age of people being trafficked in the United States? 15. What are we doing? There's no downside to securing our borders. Migrants' lives will be saved, and American lives will be saved. That's why Secretary Marcus should be impeached.
Well, you hit the nail on the head with talking about that humanitarian aspect. Simon, I want to shift it back to you. You've lived in multiple other countries. You've seen how other countries might handle sort of different types of migration flows, specifically in London. I'm curious if you could tell us, with what you're seeing in the United States today and what you've experienced in the other countries that you've served in, are you seeing the same types of patterns that we see all over social media of, France, Britain, where you've got just tons of people coming in, changing the culture, illegally entering? What are the differences and the similarities between those situations here and in Europe?
Well, I think the one great similarity is that we are both kind of being held hostage to these commitments that we made in the 50s. When it was a different world. You had Jews fleeing Nazis, you had dissidents fleeing communism, and so the refugee system that we currently have was set up for that. It was not designed for millions of people who are on the move because their governments are terrible, because their economies are going down the tubes, because they've depleted their farmland and various other things that are completely outside of our ability to help. And so Europeans are now, you're finding that parties that are in favor of controlling immigration are winning more elections and more seats because they realize that ultimately who gets to decide who comes in their countries? It's them, right? Like I get to pick who comes into my house. People don't have a human right to move into my house any more than they have a human right to come into this building and help themselves to a free taco. And I think for the last 50 years, essentially we've been over a barrel and accepting that other people have the right to bum rush our borders and they get to pick who comes. Now, I don't consider them all bad people. They're probably, the vast majority just regular Joes who are trying to get ahead, and they're taking advantage of this wide open system in the United States and in Europe. That's not going to stop. You can't blame them for trying. But ultimately, Europe and the United States get to determine who comes in and under what conditions. And those conditions should be numbers that are manageable, of populations that are assimilable in a reasonable time, that are to serve our labor needs and not their labor needs. So I think this is, people are waking up to this. The horrific Hamas attacks that Mark alluded to are one, the latest piece of evidence that our societies are split down some ideological lines, and that we have to work harder to make sure that people at least share some very common values about freedom of speech, and what we value and what we hold dear. And I think we failed to do that in the United States in the last 2.5 years, and we need to put it back on track.
Real quick, so here's another thing we need to do. We need to shift the narrative. Illegal immigration is not a victimless crime, right? And I'm not saying I disagree a little bit, but I do blame someone that is going to conspire with the cartels to knowingly and intentionally violate the rule of law, our sovereignty as a nation, and illegally enter the United States. I do blame them. I do. Because we have a legal process. Now, look, we can have a separate discussion. Should we improve our legal immigration process? It can be cumbersome. Yeah, I'm all in. That's a separate conversation. That's not what's happening at our border. What happened at our border is about border security. It's not about immigration. But that's what the other side wants you to believe. They've removed the illegal part from immigration. It's all immigration, right? You're a non-citizen, right? Whether you illegally enter the border or legally come through waiting for asylum, you're not a citizen. It's all the same. They've erased the term illegal from illegal immigration, as if there's no downside to illegal immigration. We have to take back that narrative. We have to refuse to allow our compassion to be hijacked, right? No, there is a downside. When you have millions coming across, as Mike explained before, the cartels use it as an intentional distraction. They use the migrants to distract the Border Patrol so that they're engaged, and zones A and C to the right and left are wide open. Drugs, criminals, national security threats are pouring across every single day. There is a downside to illegal immigration, and we need to take that narrative back, and we need to say, no, this is not about immigration. And that's another thing, too, locally. If you ever do a poll, you're involved in a poll, please don't call it immigration. Stop. Call it border security, right? Every single time there's a poll about border security, the numbers go up in our favor. When you talk about immigration, the polls go down against our favor, right? Because we're falling into that trap, making it about immigration. Because, right, if they make what's happening at the border about immigration and you're against what's happening at the border, you're against immigration. And then you're against brown people and you're racist. That's the narrative. We got to take back that narrative.
I'm going to shift the conversation back into something you each touched on recently, fentanyl. That's a big topic when it comes to what's going on in Mexico and how can the U.S. combat that. And the big flow that we're seeing come across is masking a lot of the fentanyl that's coming in because we don't have the capabilities to find all of it. But specifically in 2023 alone, Border Patrol said they had caught enough fentanyl in between ports of entry to kill the entire U.S. population. Texas law enforcement under Operation Lone Star has caught over 400 million lethal doses of fentanyl, so clearly this is a problem. But if one of you, whoever wants to take on this one, what shifted in Mexico that allowed for fentanyl to become what it's become today, this powerhouse coming from across our southern border?
Yeah, I could start. I mean, I think simply the criminal infrastructure was there and ready to adapt to the rise of fentanyl, reacting to some of the domestic issues here we had with prescription opioids, and they've adapted very quickly to that opportunity, criminal opportunity, and expanded that very aggressively. And that's what you can do when you have control over huge swaths of territory, these networks of illicit financial flows that go across the world, and easy access across the border. This is now become the fentanyl issue is what has refocused a lot of U.S. concern on the cartels and on drugs, and you see the reaction within the Republican debates. We'll talk about military action, but beyond that, you even see that across, in the Senate. There was a recent hearing, and you could see even the Democrats very exasperated with Mexico as a partner on fentanyl in particular, and the lack of cooperation. So this is something that is increasingly at the fore as far as our focus on transnational organized crime. The issue is that it's coming now at a time where migration is also skyrocketing. So the U.S. is faced with very difficult balancing act as far as combating, particularly in our cooperation with Mexico and some of these other countries, combating the flow of migrants and combating the flow of fentanyl and the growth of transnational organized crime. Because what we see in Mexico is you get a lot of pushback when it comes to how they handle the drug war, how they handle, don't tell us how to do it. We're going to handle that. A lot of that stems in corruption. and a lot of that also nationalism. And then you get the threats as far as when we take action, such as the arrest of corrupt officials like Cienfuegos, about dismantling some of the cooperation on migration. So a lot of this is a very difficult situation that we're confronted with. But the reality is that the U.S. has taken its foot off the pedal as far as combating the flow of fentanyl and transnational organized crime in these last few years, as this rising flow of migration has also skyrocketed. So that's also something that has permitted this crisis to get to the levels that we're seeing.
And I'll also say, I think it's another example to show that Mexico is not a legitimate partner, right? So AMLO says it's our fault because of our insatiable appetite, right? I mean, literally. I mean, he's living in an alternate universe that he takes no responsibility. I mean, it's absurd. And we know, and the second thing is, it shows, to your point, just how powerful the cartels are. They saw that, because originally, where was fentanyl coming from? China. Their international mail and express consignment, right? It was coming. And the cartel said, whoa, that's pretty cool, right? That's a good profit. And as soon as we started locking that down, and we did a pretty good job, CBP, the government did a pretty good job. Now, I'm not saying it's 100%, but we all shut down the fentanyl coming direct from China through international mail and express consignment. We did a pretty darn good job. So Mexico's like, cartels, we can get involved in that. Start a relationship directly with China now. Precursor chemicals coming directly from China. They're making their own. They hired their own chemists. They learned to make their own synthetic drugs laced with fentanyl. And why has it happened? Why is there such a growth? Because it's easy to make, it's cheap, and it's a better high than heroin. It's a perfect business model, right? And the cartels, that just shows you how tremendously effective and powerful and capable the cartels are. They are a global organization, and again, we need to wake up. And the other thing too, and I'll end with this part, our narrative, right? We suck at the narrative, right? We keep talking about programs here in the United States, right? So, okay, we'll have vending machines with Narcan and et cetera, right? We talk about all these programs here. And look, I'm not saying we don't need programs, but Rebecca, she did a great job. She was a congressional testimony. She had 2 sons under the age of 14 that took what they thought was a harmless Percocet or Adderall and it was laced with fentanyl and they died. And we were at a Lost Voice of Fentanyl in DC a couple months ago. And I talked to her because during a congressional testimony, there's an individual from the Cato Institute, which was what he was saying was just idiotic, right? And he was talking about the insatiable appetite of drugs in this country, right? Like literally providing AMLO as talking points, right? Like it's all our fault. But she looked to him with a tear running down her face. She just slammed him. She goes, let me make something clear. My 2 sons didn't have an insatiable appetite for fentanyl, right? They thought it was something else, but it was laced with fentanyl unbeknownst to them. The majority of deaths right now, 18 to 45, is fentanyl, and the majority of those deaths, they're being taken by somebody who had no idea that what they were taking was laced with fentanyl. That is not a drug addict. That is not intentional. That's an unintentional poisoning. And so we have to change that narrative and take back that narrative too, because there's this moniker that somebody dies from drugs. Oh, you're this drug addict, you're this loser, et cetera, et cetera. No, that's not what fentanyl is all about. And then I'll go back to, we have to change how we have to go to the cartels. This is never going to end.
I just would say that overall, these 2 problems, immigration, drugs, are about supply and demand. And you have to decide, where do you have control? Where can you attack? And when it comes to immigration, we control the supply. What do aliens want? They want to come in, they want to work, they want to send money home, they want to bring their families in. So using Remain in Mexico, using safe third country agreements, using deportation and deterrence, we can control the supply. When it comes to drugs, where's the supply? It's on the other side of the border. So as Mark was saying earlier, we have to attack the supply. And we have to go after the people who are making this, who are shipping it, who are bringing it in, and the politicians who are getting rich off it.
Well said.
Thank you, gentlemen, for all of those answers. I do have one final remark that I'm going to ask of you to make, but before that, I want to kick it over to our audience for some questions. If anybody has anything, please take advantage of asking these guys what you want to know.
first, thank you for being here. You evidently have some really solid answers to our issue with the border. I think that y'all will agree with me and everybody here that enough is enough. Enough is enough. We cannot keep playing nicely. Our governor has every right here in Texas to defend our borders, and we can choose what that is. Is it fentanyl? Is it crime in Texas? Is it the destruction of Texas? At what point do you feel that our state here, or our country, because the country's not going to happen right now. We can't wait for them. We can't even blame it on them anymore. Once they don't do it, it then goes to the state, and the state has the right to do everything within the power to fix this. What would you say right now to our governor first, our other leaders that are talking about this? I know trade's an issue, but heaven forbid the amount of money that we're going to spend on illegals and the destruction of our schools and hospitals and infrastructure. I know that money's important. However, let's put that aside and look at the lives and futures of the children that are being killed, the people that are being sold into slavery here in the United States, and how and what would you say if they listen to you on how to fix this?
Mark, we know your answer, so.
So, I think it's something that's been alluded to, but I think we need to start using U.S. power, economic power, as a tool to push action on the part of Mexico, because it's very clear that it's an issue of inaction in Mexico, which has allowed the situation to get where it is. So, I think we've seen how Mexico comes to the table when we start to threaten tariffs. We saw that with the USMCA process. I think that's an important. We need to link those economic issues to our national security issues and immigration issues. The other way U.S. economic power needs to be leveraged is with a more aggressive sanctions policies. I think there's really an inadequate focus on sanctioning corrupt officials in Mexico. We've seen in other parts of Latin America, the administration is very happy to sanction a bunch of officials that take bribes for a port or a road, and it's a problematic policy because of many reasons. But for whatever reason, in Mexico, we have really held off on really aggressively sanctioning, calling out a lot of these officials, security officials, and elected officials that are very actively involved in supporting the flow of drugs to the United States. So I think in those two ways, leveraging U.S. economic power would be the most important way that we can shift the status quo on drugs.
And I did that real quick. Let me talk. Honestly, if I was standing in front of the governor, and some of you may, at first, I first would say thank you. I would, honestly, this governor, because I truly believe this governor has done more than any other governor in this country, right? And everybody here, we knows we could rattle that off. Operation Lone Star. If you haven't, I really encourage you, go to their website. It's right there. The statistical accomplishments from a law enforcement perspective with respect to Operation Lone Star, it's just, it's unfathomable how successful that's been. However, after I would say, shake his hand, I would say thank you very sincerely, full stop. The other thing that I would say is, though, let's continue to have the discussion on the constitutional issue, right? Article 1, Section 10, Article 4, Section 4. That is still alive and well. It's still a real thing. He's declared the invasion. The water barrier lawsuit, and part of that, the alternative, argument was they were talking about this, right? The constitutionality of what they're doing. Unfortunately, that lawsuit was more focused on the Water Act statute rather than the constitutional issue. But with this and now the concertina wire and that, I'm hoping it's going to come to a head. I'm hoping that's by design. It's going to get to the Supreme Court, and that constitutional issue is going to get there. Because if we can address that constitutional issue, right, and it's solid that under the self-help remedy, the state of Texas now has a vast set of additional tools available to them that could potentially change the game. And to change the game this way, remove. And now there's some legislation going on. There's some challenges with it, right? Actually, what that means. But until we actually, and here's the part that sucks, right? Is the states, they should not have to be doing any of this. This is stupid, right? The state should not be doing this. And so to some degree, I know we can fall in that trap, well, it's not enough. Well, he's doing, but it's not enough. I'd say be careful about that, right? Because the threat is in an untenable, the states are in an untenable position. They're being put in a position they should not have to. This is the federal government's responsibility, full stop, full stop. They're not doing it. And so now the states are thrust into this untenable position. And one of the issues that's very real, and there's legal scholars that go back and forth, is if a National Guard or state trooper actually takes an illegal alien and pushes them across the Mexico side, that they could actually be personally liable, both civilly and criminally. We can't dismiss that. Even though, and I'm on the side, I think that's minimal, but others see it as it's greater. So what I would just suggest is keep on, right? Let's keep that discussion. Everybody in here, I would continue to push that constitutional discussion further to see if we can actually get to where we need to be. Because if we can start actually removing people, you'll see the flow go down. History proves that.
Thank you all so much for sharing. There was a lot of discussion earlier about our need to stop cartel and drug operations, and I was wondering if we could outline some specific ways on the federal level, but also specifically here in Texas on the state level, that we could do a better job of kind of attacking those sources.
Yeah, I think on the federal level, as I said, I think our capacities as far as financial intelligence are completely underfunded and insignificant to the task. So we need to really bolster our capacities on that front to identify not only what's going on as far as global transactions, but a lot of these transactions and this illicit wealth is in the United States. It's in Texas, it's in Miami. A lot of those mega mansions that you see are bought with narco money, and that's a holding area for a lot of illicit wealth, and that facilitates this broader illegal activity around the cartels. So I think on the federal level that would be one of the main ways that we would need to address that, and then maybe on the local level, I think physical barriers and capacities to monitor and interdict are essential, because if we can't stop this movement, the physical movement of drugs and people, then the financial is going to only ever get a fraction of that, So you really got to attack it on both ends, and that's why I think it's really important what's being done here in Texas on that front.
Yeah, to add to that, again, two gentlemen back there, Mike and Rodney, will tell you the basic tenet Border Patrol developed a long time ago, the multi-layer strategy, infrastructure, technology, and personnel. Anywhere where you apply that in strategic locations, all three of those elements of that strategy, every single measure of success improves. So I just want to foot stop that. But the other thing is, nationally, big Army, big DOD, they have to step up and realize that protecting our own borders is just as important as protecting other nations' borders, right? And it's not there. I can tell you, even under the Trump administration, it wasn't there, right? There is still this narrative that's out there across the country that's what happened at our borders about immigration. And so nobody wants to touch that, right? You have sheriffs in Texas that feel that way, right? Right now, there's some legislation going on that sheriffs are pushing back on because they say, I don't want to be in the immigration business. What? It's not about immigration. What's happening is about border security. Again, 1.7 million known gotaways every single day. Murderers, rapists, pedophiles, aggravated felons, and gang members are pouring across our border every single day. Aliens on the terror watch list are pouring across our border every single day. Special interest aliens from countries that harbor, sponsor, and facilitate terrorism are coming across our border every single day. It's not about immigration. It's about border security. Wake the hell up, right? And so big DOD, right, has to step up and acknowledge and accept that their mission is also to secure our borders. And that's going to be a key fundamental aspect of this. We're going to have to shore up both our policy and our infrastructure on the physical border. We're going to have to change how we go after the cartels, and we need big army to understand that their job is also to protect our borders as well.
I think we've got time for one more question.
We talked earlier this morning about the role of legal trade. So, Mark, your intelligence, your insights, we need to recognize that the cartels extort legal trade. What percentage of that would you say is their take, crossing the bridges? We know there's $700 billion of legal trade taking place. We fool ourselves to think the cartels do not get a cut of that. If we want to grow trade with Mexico, we need to have an honest assessment of how much of that money goes into the pockets of the criminals who are coming at us. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And again, Roddy, Mike, you guys can jump in here. The answer is we don't know, right? We don't know how much they're profiting from that, right? That's the answer. I'll give you an example. So a conveyance is coming across our border. Congress passed a law years ago saying we're supposed to get to 100% of inspection of conveyances coming across. We're not anywhere near that, right, through our ports. I think it's, Ronnie, Mike, do you guys, I think it's like 10%, 15%. It's something really low, right? So yeah, that's happening. But this is one where let's not, so when we say border security is synonymous with national security, right, and our safety, it's not just about the cartels as well. Let's look at China, right? I mean, they're some of the biggest violators, right, of counterproliferation. It goes on and on, right? So there's some real issues there as well. I mean, in the last 34 months, the number of Chinese nationals that have crossed our border has skyrocketed. Do you know why? I don't, because this government's not telling us. I have no idea. But you know what? That shouldn't make us feel good. So when we say national security threat, and when we say what the cartels are doing, it's a multi-layered issue. And so I go back. When we look at the economy, we have to know that the trade is actually being exploited, right? So when we look at trade, it's not okay, we have border security and then we have trade over here. Like trade is all good. No, it's not. It's a cluster. It's an issue, you know? Now look, I know I come across doom and gloom. Part of that's because I believe that. But when it comes to our ports of entry, though, we've done an incredible job. We have. I mean, on the OFO side that handles the ports, the National Targeting Center, I mean, I could go on and on what they've done. So we've done some incredible things. But to sit here and say that it's not being exploited, we're living in a dream world. We're not infallible. It's happening every single day. They're exploiting the entire southwest border. There's an old saying that says that nothing or no one crosses the border without the cartels profiting from it, right?
Thank you all for your questions. Before we finish, I want to know, I'm not sure if he's still testifying, but this morning Secretary Mayorkas was testifying in the Senate. Our friend Chad Wolf over at AFPI sent over a message saying that he continues to talk about managing the crisis, but not solving it. He said the asylum backlog would go away if only there was amnesty. So let's say we're in 2024, new president gets elected. You're each appointed his special advisors to Mexico for the entire country. In one or two sentences max, what would you tell him he needed to immediately do? Simon, I'll start with you.
Well, that's obviously a fiction because you would get rid of the backlog and then tomorrow it would start growing again. It's never going to go away. The demand is insatiable. You have to reform the asylum system. You've got to return it to what it was meant to be. It's not for people who don't have a good job. It's not for people who are threatened by crime in their neighborhood. There are specific requirements that we are ignoring. So number one would be reform the whole credible fear asylum structure and have people wait outside the United States or go into the refugee process, which has been basically abandoned, if they want to come into the United States through that route and not through a legal visa.
Yeah, I think as far as Mexico, you have to, again, put pressure on the Mexican government to act because that action isn't going to come from within. And part of being able to do that is securing our border, because as long as you rely on other governments to handle migration for you, you're always going to have your national security at risk and your other priorities left aside as you have to accommodate the different focus and different preferences of other governments in order to maintain that security. So we need to stop that reliance and exert that pressure.
2 sentences will be tough for me. First,
the rule was only for you.
First, I would file criminal charges against Secretary Mayorkas, hoping that he goes to jail. 2, I'd declare a national emergency. I'd deploy the United States military down to physically secure our border, and I would fundamentally change and go after the cartels as we do terrorist organizations on day one.
Well, those are all great answers. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining us today. I'm sure there's still a lot of questions to be asked of you, so watch out as you try to leave here. From here, we will be going to the theater, to upstairs on the 6th floor for lunch, which will begin at noon, I believe. And I realize I didn't start off the panel by introducing myself, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Celine Rodriguez. I'm a policy director for our Secure and Sovereign Frontier campaign, and thank you guys so much for everything you're doing and for joining us today.